Some cultures just have this really unique flavor, right? A mix of history, values, daily habits, things that really make things stand out. And today we're doing a deep dive into one of the most, well, dynamic and fascinating cultures out there, Korea. Our mission for you listening is to uncover what makes Koreans distinctive, their unique characteristics, and maybe more importantly, understand why. Why do these traits exist? We've gathered a whole stack of sources, academic stuff, real world chats, cultural guides, trying to give you a really full picture of what makes Korea, well, Korea.
That's right. And it's pretty fascinating because, Korea is primarily made up of one Northeast Asian group. But over centuries, they've really forged their own unique culture, their own character and identity. It's definitely distinct from their neighbors. And it's something Koreans are, frankly, very proud of. Our sources keep pointing to things like diligent hard work, filial piety, humbleness. These are seen as really respected foundational characteristics.
Okay, so we've got this idea of a really unique culture. But what's the bedrock? Like, what's the core principle that shapes how people interact, how society is set up? Where do we even start unpacking that collective spirit?
Well, the foundation really is collectivism. It's this deep-seated belief that basically prioritizes the group over the individual. And that's tied in with a strong sense of tolerance. And this wasn't just, a philosophical choice. It was hammered out through some incredible historical adversity. Think about it, constant invasions over centuries, the Japanese occupation, the Korean War. These aren't just dates in a history book. They were like crucible moments that created this absolute need for people to work together, support each other, just to survive and rebuild.
Wow, that's a powerful way to put it. Forged in survival. So if collectivism came from that, what does it mean day to day? Does it mean like there's less space for individual voices or opinions?
Precisely. I mean, the strength of it is obvious, right? You get high social stability, amazing cooperation. Koreans can pull together for common goals like incredibly efficiently. But yeah, the flip side, the potential weakness, is definitely that difficulty in, let's say, candid individual expression. People often feel this strong pressure to fit in, to conform. And it can be genuinely hard to, voice a different opinion or even strong personal feelings
Yeah.
if it might rock the boat, disrupt the harmony.
Okay, so harmony is key. And building on that collective idea and harmony, there's this other layer that seems really fascinating, especially about hierarchy. Something we found, and it feels quite different to maybe Western observers, is this pretty rigid age hierarchy. So, what's the story behind that? How does that actually work in real life?
Yeah, that hierarchy is deeply, profoundly influenced by Confucianism. It's this ancient philosophy, that puts huge emphasis on respect, obedience, and really clearly defined roles. And those roles are based mostly on age and historically, at least, gender. It's why one of the very first things someone might ask you in Korea is your age. It's not just being nosy. It's about establishing that relational status. Who's older, who's younger. That determines how you interact right from the start. And you see examples everywhere, like at a meal. You wait. You don't start eating until the elders at the table have begun. And the language itself has these built-in honorifics. They're critical. So a younger woman talking to an older guy uses oppa. A younger man uses hyung. And then for older women, it's uni from a younger woman and nuna from a younger man. These aren't just nicknames. They're baked into showing respect, defining the relationship. Now, traditional gender roles, those are slowly changing, with Western influence and modernization. But that expectation of respecting your elders, that's still incredibly strong, deeply ingrained.
Okay, so if individual expression can be tricky within that collectivist frame, and interactions are guided by this strict age hierarchy, how do people actually navigate all that and still keep things harmonious? This focus on harmony, it brings us to some really interesting concepts about communication, doesn't it?
Absolutely. This is where Gibbon and Nunchi become so important. Give them, you could translate it as someone's feeling, their emotion, their state of mind. It's sort of their internal balance, their dignity, their face. And hurting someone's gibbon, that's a big deal, a major social mistake. So keeping the atmosphere harmonious often matters more than, say, getting straight to the point or telling a blunt truth. And Nucci, that's the skill. It's the art, really, of figuring out someone's gibbon. It's how Koreans pick up on the real meaning, which is often said indirectly. You have to watch the body language, the tiny facial cues, the tone of voice, the implications. It's all about reading between the lines, understanding what's not said just as much as what is.
Wow, reading between the lines to protect someone's given. So does that mean direct confrontation is just completely avoided? How do people handle difficult stuff like giving feedback at work, in a high pressure place without causing offense?
That's a great question. And it's exactly why indirect communication is so common in Korea. Again, it goes back to those Confucian roots. The main goal is preserving harmony and letting everyone save face, which they call kamyeon. And showing respect for authority, of course.
Yeah.
So instead of saying, you're wrong, a Korean colleague might phrase it like, that's an interesting point. Maybe we could also think about another way. Or if they need something, instead of demanding, it might be, would it be possible to maybe consider this option? It's a very high context culture. So much meaning is in the nonverbal stuff, even silence. Silence doesn't necessarily mean they disagree or aren't interested. It could mean they're thinking it over or even agreeing. It can definitely trip up people from more direct cultures.
Right. Okay, so shifting from that communal base, what does all this focus on harmony and group mean for like individual ambition? Because looking at Korea, you also see this incredibly strong, almost fierce drive for success. What's fueling that intensity?
Yeah, education. The huge importance placed on education in Korean society is definitely a massive factor. It's not just seen as important, it's often viewed as the main path, sometimes the only path, to a successful life for the individual and for the whole family. Our sources paint a picture of a really intense student life, kids spending all day at school, then going to multiple private tutors, hagwons they call them, junior high, high school kids. They're often at school for like over 12 hours, getting up at 6:30 a.m., studying late. And those annual college entrance exams, they're incredibly competitive. Some students will take them again and again just to get into one of the top universities. It's really an all-consuming race.
Wow. And that intense pressure in school just flows right into adult life, doesn't it? This drive for achievement. What does that do to society more broadly?
Well, let's call it an obsession with competition and achievement. It seems to come from the environment itself. Korea has limited land, limited resources, a very high population density, and the job market is fiercely competitive. So this constant drive, kind of born from scarcity, it absolutely fueled Korea's incredible economic growth, that miracle on the Han River. Their pioneering spirit is amazing. They've achieved so much so fast. But here's the twist, the paradox, right? That same engine driving success also creates enormous internal pressure. It's not just high stress like we might think of it. It can lead to this deep dissatisfaction, even when people achieve amazing things, because they're always being measured against this incredibly high societal standard. It really makes you wonder, what point does that collective drive start to impact individual happiness?
That's a really crucial point. So, given that drive, that paradox, what about work-life balance in Korea today? Does the old reputation for super long hours and total company loyalty still hold true? Or are things maybe changing there?
Historically, yeah, there was definitely a strong expectation. You joined a company, you stay there your whole life. Loyalty and personal sacrifice for the company were huge, but we're seeing a definite shift, especially with the younger generations, people in their 20s, 30s. They're much more likely to job hop now. They're looking for better pay, better opportunities, not necessarily lifelong loyalty. For the older folks, though, 40s, 50s, it's often harder. There's still quite a bit of ageism in the job market, so they tend to stay put, sometimes more out of necessity than choice.
Yeah.
And overtime. Okay, so legally, there's now a 52-hour maximum work week. And the big companies, your Samsungs, your SKs, they generally stick to it. But, and this is important, unpaid overtime definitely still happens, especially in smaller companies or in really demanding fields like IT. And there's other interesting cultural things. Sometimes people stay late just to look busy, to appear diligent, especially if their boss is still working, even if they aren't actually productive. Ah, the FaceTime culture. Exactly. So it can lead to lower productivity per hour, but it fulfills that cultural expectation of showing dedication. And how do people cope with the burnout? Well, our sources mention things like, unfortunately, heavy drinking, aiming for early retirement if possible, and a really heavy reliance on delivery food just to save time.
Wow. So even with laws, that cultural pressure to look diligent can keep people at work. It almost sounds like a workaround, not a real change in the deep work ethic.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean for like the individual person and their family? How do these really deep values play out in personal identity and those basic family bonds?
Family. That's undoubtedly the absolute core of Korean society, the most important unit. The family's well-being, its reputation, its success, it's consistently valued more than the individual's desires or needs. And filial piety, the deep respect and duty towards parents and elders, is just fundamental. It's a cornerstone. It even extends beyond living relatives to honoring ancestors. They have these elaborate ceremonies, Sung, during big holidays like Chuseok, Harvest Festival, and Seolal, Lunar New Year. It's a very real living link to their heritage. And when you look at gender roles, traditionally, yeah, the father was the clear head of the family, housework. That was almost entirely the woman's domain. Now, sure, more women work outside the home today. Things are changing. But some of those basic assumptions about gender roles, they still persist pretty strongly. Our sources mention, for instance, that some mothers might still get genuinely upset if they see their sons helping their wives with cooking or cleaning. It reflects that older mindset about what's man's work and woman's work.
Interesting. And this focus on the group, on interdependence, it even shows up in how people talk about themselves and their stuff, right? It really highlights that prioritizing of the group.
Oh, absolutely. It's quite striking. You hear we constantly. Our parents, our school, our company, even our house, when an English speaker would definitely say my.
Hmm.
And it's not just a habit, it's considered the normal way to speak. It really reflects this core belief that individuals are part of the community first and foremost, and the community's well-being is tied to theirs. It's even connected to how the Korean language itself is structured. It often defines people by their relationships to others, not just as standalone individuals. And again, like with collectivism generally, the potential downside here can be that it might be harder for people to really carve out their own distinct identity or develop purely personal hobbies or talents because the focus is so much on their role within the group.
Okay, let's zoom in even more now on just the everyday interactions. How do all these things we've talked about, the collectivism, the hierarchy, the harmony focus, how do they shape just basic communication style, even things like personal space?
Well, given how important harmony and protecting Giben are, Koreans generally tend to express emotions pretty indirectly. They often conceal strong feelings inwardly. There's this sense that being too direct or openly emotional could cause problems, could lead to criticism, could disrupt that social balance. So for outsiders, for you maybe interacting with Koreans, it means you really have to tune in to the subtle stuff. Those quick facial expressions, the tone shifts, the pauses, they carry a lot of weight. Practical tips from the sources. Use softer language instead of a flat no, maybe, I'm not sure if that's possible right now. And frame feedback as a suggestion, like perhaps we can consider, rather than a direct critique. And then personal space and touch. Generally, the norm is about a meter, maybe more with people you don't know. Physical touch during a conversation, usually not okay unless you're with really close friends. Greetings are typically bowing or maybe handshakes, but there are rules there too. The junior person bows lower, the senior person usually initiates a handshake, and often they'll use both hands for the handshake as a sign of extra respect. Hugging. Definitely not standards for greetings in most situations.
Right. And what about eye contact? That's often a tricky one between cultures, isn't it? Especially if communication is already indirect.
Yeah, that's another area where things are shifting a bit. Traditionally, making direct eye contact with someone older or higher in status, that was considered improper, maybe even rude, like a challenge. But in modern Korea, especially with younger people and definitely in business settings, there's much more comfort with direct eye contact now, though just staring intensely at someone is still considered rude. So it's kind of this blend tradition is still there, but modernization is changing things. It's a dynamic point for visitors to be aware of.
Okay. So, pulling this all together, what's the big picture here? We've gone deep into these really fascinating, sometimes complex characteristics that define Korean culture. From the deep historical roots to how things are changing today, we've tried to get at the why behind it all.
Yeah, I think if you step back, you see Korean culture as this incredible mix. They're fiercely preserving their unique heritage while also modernizing at lightning speed and engaging with the world. We've seen how collectivism, that strong hierarchy, the indirect communication, the intense competition, and those super strong family ties all weave together. And each one has its strengths. They've fueled incredible success, but also brings its own challenges shaping life for Koreans both individually and as a society.
Understanding all this isn't just, trivia. It's really about appreciating the incredibly rich living context that makes a society work the way it does and seeing how history shapes everyday life right now.
Absolutely. And maybe this leaves you, our listener, with something to think about. Given how deep-seated some of these traits are, particularly that age hierarchy and the intense competition, what are the challenges ahead for things like individual expression and maybe overall well-being in Korea? How might more global exposure, maybe changing attitudes among younger Koreans, shifting demographics, how might all that speed up or slow down these cultural changes? And how could that redefine what it even means to be Korean in the decades to come?